If I'd been given responsibility for making Brexit happen, it would have been very different.
But that's an easy get-out. That's a bit like where you are now in Reform, where you're saying, I'm not in charge.
In 2019, and there's a trap here, you see. You're on benefits, you go back to work, you work more than 16 hours a week, the tax kicks in, you may as well stay on benefits. There is a terrible... A migrant a minute comes to Britain. In fact, it's actually more than that, but in simple terms, a migrant a minute comes. We have never...
How many migrants are you saying come to Britain?
Well, 2.5 million have come to Britain over the course of the last 2 years. In fact, 1 in 30 people on the streets of Britain today has come in the last 2 years.
Now, that figure, I will say...
Which is extraordinary.
That figure, we have fact-checked that figure, and that figure takes a look at the people who are coming in and hasn't accounted for the people who have left.
A migrant a minute is net, but the gross figure is 2.5 million people.
1 in 30 is...
Nigel Farage walked into that BBC studio, and it was clear from the start the hosts had one goal. They weren't there for a friendly chat. Their mission? To rattle him, make him slip, and paint him as uninformed.
30 is not net, is it?
And here's the thing. Half of those that have come aren't coming to work. They're coming as dependents.
Where did you get that figure?
52% that have come as dependents.
But guess what? He didn't just hold his ground, he owned it. Every question they threw at him, whether it was meant to corner or confuse, was met with sharp, clear answers. Not vague talking points or political fluff. Actual facts, straight from the man himself. It was like watching a master at work while his critics struggled to keep up.
We've even allowed 125,000 people...
Who in the future could work, yeah? Children don't come over here and not work, do they?
This is making us poorer. It's very interesting. Everyone says we need net migration for GDP, the size of the national cake. Actually, GDP per capita, per person, has fallen for the last 6.
And here's the thing, the more they pushed, the calmer he seemed. The harder they tried to trip him up, the stronger his responses became. No hesitation, no backpedaling, just straightforward, thoughtful replies. By the end of it, the attempt to make him look foolish had completely backfired. Viewers couldn't help but notice how unshaken he was. It was a moment that left people thinking, could this be the kind of leadership the country needs?
A massive influx of unskilled labour has driven down productivity, but intolerable
productivity
pressure...
was an issue long time before migration
yes, and it's getting
became
worse.
A political
And it's getting worse. So look, all I'm arguing is common sense. We're living through a population explosion. We can't cope. It's making us poorer, and our living standards...
Because let's be honest, in a world of political dodging, someone who can handle that level of scrutiny with ease feels like a rarity. And it's making a lot of people take notice. Nigel Farage isn't just winning interviews, he's winning over the public. Reform UK, the party he's championing, is gaining momentum every single day. And it's not just talk. Membership numbers are skyrocketing, with some reports claiming they've even surpassed the Conservatives. That's not a small achievement. It's a warning shot to the political establishment.
And by the way, I'm all for people coming into Britain and British people working abroad. I'm all for it. But the scale on which this is happening is appalling. And for the Conservatives, it is a complete breach.
What's appalling about it?
Polls are beginning to reflect this shift. Reform UK has been steadily climbing, even overtaking Labour in some areas. This isn't just about dissatisfaction with the old parties. It's about Farage himself. His message is resonating with people who feel let down by the current political class. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Farage's vision for leadership is starting to look more like a reality than a long shot. His clarity on issues, especially immigration and national reform, is striking a chord with a frustrated electorate. He's positioning himself as the voice of common sense in a political landscape full of confusion.
The fact that young kids can't get houses, the fact that rents are up over 20%
so
in the last 3 years.
You're blaming migrants.
I'm blaming the population explosion. It's as simple as that. The Conservatives promised in the last 4 manifestos to reduce the level of net migration. In fact, in 3 of them, they promised to tens of thousands a year. It is now 750,000. That is a complete breach of trust.
With every interview, rally, and policy announcement, the idea of Farage as Prime Minister feels less like a wild headline and more like a serious possibility. If this surge continues, he won't just be leading a movement, he'll be leading a government. And that's a scenario the current parties might not be ready for. When Naga Munchetty faced Nigel Farage on live TV, it was clear she had done her homework. She came prepared to challenge him, to trip him up with tough questions. But Farage, he was more than ready. From the start, he answered every question with precision, cutting through any attempt to corner him. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Calm, composed, and confident. It didn't take long before the tables turned. Munchetty tried to catch him off guard on immigration figures, questioning his sources and credibility. But instead of backing down, Farage doubled down, calmly presenting his case and refusing to budge. By the end, her frustration was evident. It wasn't just that Farage was quick with his answers, it was that he was unshakable.
And the promises that you made alongside the existing government at the time, you know, there were lots of people making lots of arguments, but you were knee-deep in that about what would change if we left the European Union. And it hasn't happened. And you were one of those telling us what it would be like.
Viewers couldn't help but notice the shift in energy. What started as a grilling turned into a masterclass in handling pressure. Farage didn't just answer questions, he took control of the conversation. It left Munchetty visibly unsettled and viewers impressed. This moment wasn't just another interview, it was a clear sign of why Farage is gaining traction. He doesn't just defend his points, he dominates the narrative, and it's this ability that's making people take his leadership potential seriously. Farage has one thing that separates him from most politicians. He speaks plainly and directly. He doesn't sugarcoat issues or hide behind political jargon. Whether it's about immigration, national security, or economic reform, his focus is always on what he believes is best for the UK.
And it hasn't happened.
Well, let's fact check this, shall we? What I said in the referendum is we would be in charge. And whether we got things right or got things wrong would be down to us. Now, there was a reasonable expectation that we'd tighten up border controls and that fewer people would come. That is why Brexit passed.
To be fair, do you not think that people listen to you as a politician, as a campaign? Well, you weren't a politician there, you're a campaigner.
Yeah.
And do you not think they listened to you and the message they got with this would be different?
Take immigration, for example. While others dodge the topic or dance around numbers, Farage confronts it head-on. He doesn't just state problems, he backs them with data. That straightforwardness is rare in politics today, and it's why so many people see him as the man to lead the country. But it's not just his policies, it's his approach. Farage speaks in a way that feels honest. People may not always agree with him, but they know where he stands. That's why he's become a figure people trust, especially those tired of broken promises from mainstream parties. His supporters don't see him as just another politician, they see him as someone who cares about their struggles, someone who wants to fix what's broken. It's why he's connecting with voters across the spectrum, from lifelong Conservatives to disillusioned Labour supporters.
And it hasn't been different, and therefore that puts you in the same place as those politicians who said
I wasn't in charge. If I'd been given responsibility for making Brexit happen, it would have been very different.
But that's an easy get-out. That's a bit like where you are now in reform, where you're saying...
Farage isn't just offering ideas, he's offering a vision. And for a country craving change, that vision is becoming harder to ignore. Nigel Farage didn't shy away from bold statements during his BBC interview. He dropped a statistic that instantly turned the room tense. Every minute, a migrant enters the UK. For Naga Munchetty, this claim was a red flag. She immediately pushed back, accusing Farage of exaggerating or outright lying. But Farage, unfazed as always, didn't back down. He reiterated his point with confidence, referencing government data and reports to support his argument. This wasn't just a heated exchange, it was a clash of perspectives. Farage framed it as a pressing national issue, while Munchetti questioned the numbers and intent behind his words.
Right, in the general election, I stood aside in over 300 seats to give Boris Johnson a free run, to get Brexit over the line and to deliver the promises that he made. The reason on migration that Brexit has failed in the eyes of many people is because the Conservative Party...
What made it more compelling was the emotion behind it. Munchetti's visible frustration highlighted just how polarizing the topic is. Farage, however, kept steering the conversation back to his core message, the need for stricter immigration controls. This moment struck a chord with viewers. Whether they agreed or disagreed, it was hard to ignore the sheer conviction in Farage's delivery. It wasn't just about the figures, it was about trust. Who has the courage to address sensitive topics without dodging? For many, Farage's willingness to take the heat only added to his appeal as a leader unafraid to speak hard truths. Farage's ability to rattle opponents isn't limited to interviews, it's in the details he brings to the table. His stance on migration is a prime example. He doesn't just highlight the problem, he dissects it with facts that leave critics scrambling. The migration figure he mentioned, which sparked such backlash from Naga Munchetti, is just one piece of the broader picture he's painting. Farage consistently emphasizes how unchecked migration impacts public services, housing, and job markets. His critics argue he's fear-mongering, but his supporters see it differently. They believe he's exposing truths others are too afraid to address.
Delivered. But be in no doubt, we are in charge of these things. Brexit gives us self-government. That doesn't guarantee success, but it does mean we're in charge.
One of your candidates, Erin Crawford, has said that she'd like to hear you talk more than immigration and taxation, for example.
Yes.
Hear more. And your party has promised to raise the tax-free personal allowance. It's currently around £12,500, just over, to £20,000. One of the things we've been trying to do is get firm numbers from all the parties, full costings.
It's no wonder his opponents dislike him. Farage refuses to tone down his rhetoric, even when faced with hostility. In that same BBC interview, his refusal to waver left Munchetti visibly irritated. For Farage, staying firm on his data isn't just strategy, it's his brand. These moments reinforce why so many see him as a breath of fresh air. He isn't interested in softening his stance to please critics. Instead, he's focused on what he calls real issues affecting everyday people. And as his message gains traction, it's clear his opponent's frustration only fuels his rise. As Nigel Farage gains momentum, one thing is becoming clear: he's setting his sights on Keir Starmer. The next election is shaping up to be more than just a battle of policies, it's a battle of ideologies. And Farage is already sharpening his arguments. Farage doesn't hold back when discussing Labour's shortcomings under Starmer. He criticises what he calls their vague stances and lack of decisive action. For voters frustrated with political ambiguity, Farage's bluntness is a refreshing change. His strategy is simple: highlight the gaps in Starmer's leadership and present himself as the alternative.
That is an enormous cost. It's about 50 billion, but it's also very imaginative. As we all know...
What is that? Sorry, imaginative. What do you mean by that?
But it's not the kind of thinking you get from the others, because, because they stick with orthodoxy. One of the big problems we've got is we have more and more people, young people too, living off welfare. And it's costing us over £100 billion a year. What we want to do, and there's a trap here, you see. You're on benefits, you go back to work, you work more than 16 hours a week, the tax kicks in, you may as well...
What makes this clash so intriguing is the stark contrast between the two. Starmer relies on cautious messaging, while Farage thrives on direct, no-nonsense talk. It's a dynamic that could reshape traditional voting patterns. Farage's growing support from former Conservative and Labour voters signals that his appeal isn't limited to one base. The real question is, can Farage's rising star sustain itself against Labour's established presence? If he continues to dominate public discussions and gain ground in polls, Starmer could face a serious challenge. For now, one thing is certain. Farage is no longer just an outsider, he's a contender. And the political landscape might never look the same again.